March of 2024, I was sitting on my back porch and a sudden thought came into my head that shook me to my core. The thought was that I had, if I was lucky, 50 more years left in my journey on Earth. Only 50, though. 50 New Year's celebrations, 50 birthdays. Only 50 more times would I feel that first morning crisp air that indicated the end of a blazing hot Texas summer as I walked out on my back porch. 50 more Easters or Christmases, 50 more chances to impact the world in the way that I had always envisioned that I would. So what was interesting is that while the thought scared me, it more deeply opened up some disappointment in how I'd been living up to that point, and it followed quickly by an investigation into myself. Like, what was I doing with the time I had? Was I living out my purpose? See, I was turning 37 that year, and after 20 years in society as an adult, I had to admit that almost nothing I was doing felt like it was purpose driven. I had all the entrapments of what would be called success. I had a nice house, I had two cars, I had a beautiful wife, I had two kids, a boy and a girl, and I had a job that was secure at a well-known Fortune 200 company, and I was good at it. So, isn't this the American dream? Like, what was wrong with me? Why was I not happy with the life that I created? Why was I so unhappy that I drank every single day for 15 years? See, I wasn't under a bridge doing heroin or something that society would deem extreme or terrible, but it felt like, I don't know, all my life's data points weren't lining up with the actions I was taking in public. I started to look around at where I lived. I mean, I don't know, it was the side of town I had always lived in. It was the side of town that if you look from an aerial view, it kind of looks like it looks similar to the maze created at an ant farm, right? Like with winding canals, some of them dead ends that we called cul-de-sacs, right? And the winding canals that we called streets. We drove our cars to and from work, up and down those streets, and to and from school. And we returned home each evening to a house we had bought in a slightly upper middle class neighborhood. We'd cut out of work a little bit early on Friday to jump into a happy hour with some friends and then beat traffic home, all to wake up on a Saturday to start with basketball and dance recitals. Then we'd fill it with pool parties in the afternoon, watch football games on Saturdays and Sundays, stay up too late Friday and Saturday, but with the knowing that Sunday, hey, we could all go to brunch, get some mimosas and Bloody Marys, and then start grilling and watch football again. And then about 6, 7 o'clock on a Sunday, start to shut it down before we did it all again the next week. And I started to wonder, was this what it was all about? You ever felt that way? You ever felt like you were in a cycle, repeating the same patterns over and over, just knowing there was something greater inside of you waiting to be unleashed? Maybe the cycle of life is producing a good life for you, so you feel bad feeling unfulfilled. That's how I felt. I didn't feel like I deserved to feel unfulfilled. I don't know, maybe you're a corporate leader like I was, but you know you have a calling that's greater to be maybe an entrepreneur, or maybe you're called to be a teacher or a pastor. Maybe you're in school and you're a football player and that's the role that everyone thinks you should be in, but you love art or dance or drama, or maybe you just want to be class president and it doesn't line up with your narrative today. Feeling bad about this can lead us searching to fulfillment in other areas. I don't know, like sometimes it's done in healthy ways. Sometimes it's done with volunteering in the area that I'm passionate about, or maybe having a hobby. Most of the time, if we're lucky, it's only distracting. It's done through social media, it's done through Netflix, right? But if we're less fortunate, it can be extremely damaging. Like what I did, alcohol, or maybe it's pornography. Whatever it is, it's all done in the name of one mission. It's to pass the time so I can avoid facing the fact that I am not living in line with my purpose, and the responsibility, and this is a tough one, only lies with me to rebuild my life to begin feeling fulfilled again. I don't know, maybe this isn't your story. Maybe it's just something that only happens to the rare few of us, but I have a feeling this sounds familiar to some. And if so, please know you're not alone. And there is a path to being able to rebuild towards your purpose in life. And no, it's not too late. So today we're going to talk about what it means to rebuild the best version of yourself. And this isn't about fixing anything in your life. This is about truly rediscovering and realigning with your purpose. Society will tell us to fix a lot of things, fix our diet, fix our exercise habits, fix our finances, fix our relationships, and fixing things just doesn't fix things. We need to truly figure out what areas we need to rebuild in because our purpose depends on it. So whether you're feeling stuck or overwhelmed or maybe just in need of a fresh start, this journey is for you. Now, as we dig into it, it's going to be pretty practical. And there's 3 phases to the full rebuilding process. And the 3 phases are, the first one is very basic. I got to figure out if rebuilding is actually necessary. You know, sometimes I can put spackle and paint over something and it does the job. And if that's the case, kudos to you. This journey is probably not for you. But if rebuilding is really necessary, we got to figure that out. And then we're going to ask 3 questions to help determine whether rebuilding is necessary or not here in a little bit. The second phase of this is the rebuild itself. If the rebuild is necessary, what does that look like? You know, I liken it to rebuilding a house or a structure. If I've never rebuilt a house, I don't know how to do it. So we're going to go into the 4-step process of rebuilding yourself in an area and what that looks like, what to expect, and how to actually do it step by step. And the third phase is, how do you walk in this new normal? If I'm used to navigating my life as it's currently constructed, how do I walk in this new normal when I've rebuilt something that I've never done before? I've never intentionally rebuilt an area of my life. So how do I walk in that new normal? What to expect with the new you is really the 3rd step of rebuilding. Listen, today we're only going to have time for phase 1. And I think if we figure out phase 1, it's going to be extremely valuable and help us on our path. And we may have time to jump into step 1 of phase 2 just to get your taste buds rolling. But listen, at the end of the day, we need to figure out if rebuilding is the step we need to take. And we need to know what to do along the way so that the rebuild doesn't turn into a demolition. We don't want to blow the whole thing up. Parts of your life are great, but parts you feel like you're in the same rut over and over again. So let's start with phase 1. Let's figure out if this actually needs to happen for you, or if you're just in some weird funk. Listen, everyone gets in that rut every once in a while, and like, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think we've got to be honest with ourselves on if the rut has turned into a ditch. Many of us fall in the trap of routine every day, doing the same things day in and day out, even when we know they're not serving us. And there is nothing more frustrating than waking up every day knowing that yesterday I did the same thing that's not serving me, and today, well, my schedule looks the same as it did yesterday. So we might even convince ourselves that it's easier to stay in the comfort zone than it is to challenge ourselves to grow. And at the end of the day, it's on us to make that decision. Greg Plitt, who was a former Army Ranger, once wrote this, and I love this. He said, comfort zones are deadly zones because you lose your true potential of what you can be, and you start going with the status quo. And that's a scary place to be. And the reason why is the status quo, especially in America today, is a really tough spot. The status quo is filled with debt. Status quo is filled with a 50% divorce rate. The status quo is filled with absentee parenting. The status quo is filled with alcohol and substance abuse and increased depression and increased anxiety rates. The status quo is not a place to be admired. It's a scary place. So let's think about the areas of our life. Let's think about the different areas of our life that we have been doing the same thing over and over that haven't been serving us. Maybe it's your career. Maybe it's your relationships. Maybe it's your parenting or your health. Maybe it's spirituality. Maybe it's, I don't know, what you do in your free time. The question I want us to ask is, am I thriving everywhere that I could be? Now, before we go any further, we got to define what thriving is. That sounds like a really cool buzzword, but at the end of the day, if we don't define what it is, I don't know if I'm thriving or not. So I love what Malcolm Stern had to say about this. He was a rabbi and a historian, and he said, thriving isn't about making life comfortable, fun, and happy. It's about finding purpose and making our own unique contribution. So for this time together, we're going to use that as our North Star to determine whether we're thriving or not. We're gonna decide whether we're thriving or not by asking ourselves, are we finding purpose in that area? And are we making our own unique contribution? So I told you we have 3 questions to ask ourselves to figure out if we need to rebuild or not in an area or maybe a lot, in an area or multiple. So the first question is, am I getting the results I expect from the work that I do? This question is a fruit inspection question. See, everything we do with the expectation of result, right? If I do work for the company I work for, I expect to get paid the wage that was agreed upon when I took that job. If I am parenting my kids, I feel like my kids should be growing in maturity or in how they're evolving in life. Now, I don't know about you, but as a parent, that one is tougher than I thought it would be. But the same thing is true of everything in life, positive or negative. So if I'm parenting my kids, do I feel like I'm constantly upset with them and therefore upset with myself on how I react to things? Often, if I'm more stressed, then why do I'm supposed to enjoy my kids? So if parenting is stressing me out, maybe I'm not doing it the way that God's telling me to do it. Maybe, watch this. I'll speak for myself. You see, when I inspected, am I getting the results from what I'm doing? I was asking myself that about bad things too. I was asking myself about, when I drink, am I getting the escape I expect? And the short answer was no. I actually go into the schizophrenic state of doing the thing, hoping it gives me what it needs or what I need and what I expect. It does for a short time, then it goes away. Now I'm mad that I did it, but I need the effect still. So I do it more. And if that's you, you may be in a place where you need to rebuild that thing. And it may be a vice, it may be a habit, it may be just an area. But ultimately, everything we do it with an expectation of a result. And if we're not getting the expected results in the area, we may need to rebuild it completely. If we're getting that expected result, then maybe we're just frustrated right now. We're going through a short season of downturn, which is, listen, it happens in life. Everyone goes through ruts. But at the end of the day, that first question, that fruit inspection, if we're not getting the result from the expected result from the work that we're doing, it may be time to rebuild. The second question we need to ask ourselves is, am I expecting results from the work that I'm not doing? This is a seed inspection question. And this one hits deep. Don't expect results from the work you didn't do. When this happens, we want a result for something that we didn't do or without the discipline or motivation to make it happen. So often we sit around dreaming or wishing or, man, just speaking the truth. And at the end of the day, it feels like we're doing a lot, but we're really fixing things on the surface. We're doing the aesthetics. We're doing the speak it into existence. We're doing the dream building. But if we're expecting to actually get a result, we may need to rebuild what we call work. And it may be time to go deeper into the structure or the foundation to actually do this thing right. And the third question is, if this trend continues in whatever area, finances, marriage, relationships, career, spirituality, health, if this trend continues, will I be able to look back and know that I fulfilled my purpose? This question is a legacy inspection question. Listen, at the end of our life, or at the end of seasons, we all have a lingering question wondering if we've reached our potential. If I've done things in a certain way where I can look back and say, I may not have ever done everything right, but I did the best I could. And that seems like a simple question, but only we know if we've truly done our best. And did we get out of our comfort zone? Did we push ourselves? Did we make the impact we were destined to make? Or did we play it safe? Did we make excuses too much? Did we sell ourselves short, but acted and talked like we left it all on the field to convince others and unfortunately to convince ourselves? See, I think true happiness is in those moments of reflection to ourselves. We can say we did the best we could to align with the purpose we had here on earth. And if that's not happening in any area right now, it may be time to get down to the work of rebuilding. So I ask again, in the areas of your career or your relationships or your health or your faith or your finances or your parenting or maybe just your attitude, are you thriving? Or is there an area that constantly feels off? Like something isn't right. And if you can find an area this applies to, that's where we're going to spend some time to rebuild. And if there's multiple, don't worry. Listen, most of the time there are, mainly because we haven't really taken the time to inspect our life as it truly is. No reason to be embarrassed or feel pitiful about it. It's usually this kind of work that when it begins, it's rarely one place that needs to be looked at. So the way we will address rebuilding will affect all areas of your life simultaneously. So we're going to do it once and we're going to do it right. Awareness is always the first step toward change. Can't fix what you don't acknowledge. So let's take a moment to acknowledge where you are right now. Be honest. What's working and what's not. So once you've addressed a place, an area, a spotlight in your life, at the end of the day, it's about you being honest with you and nobody else. So phase 2 is if there is an area or multiple in your life that you need to rebuild, well, how do you do that? So for this part, we're going to think about if you bought a home in the middle of nowhere in the state you live in, and it was a complete teardown. I mean, this thing had weeds overgrowing it. This thing was not lived in for 20 years. It had beams rotting. It had rats living in it. It had mold and asbestos and just water damage. I mean, it was a complete teardown. So the question is, how do you actually do this rebuilding thing? And the answer is easier when you envision that structure, because there's 2 phases. The first thing I got to do to that structure is tear it down. I got to tear it down. I can't build something on top of that. And that's what we do often in our life. We take a broken down structure and that's what fixing does. And we just say, well, I got to build something new. But we don't tear down the other structure. So the first phase is we got to tear it down. And then the second phase is we build it up. But what does breaking down the current structure actually look like? Well, the first question we got to ask before we figure out what breaking down the current structure looks like is, what are the elements of my structure? So there's 4 key pillars to the structures of our life. The first pillar is our thoughts. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he, right? A proverb as old as time. Our thoughts drive everything that we do in our life. Our words come from our thoughts. Our associations come from our thoughts. Our habits come from our thoughts. Our mentality comes from our thoughts. Our actions and reactions come from our thoughts. I'm not going to react negatively if I think positively. So we have to think about what we're thinking about, and we're going to dig into that a little bit. The second pillar of our life is our words. Power of life and death lie in the tongue. What are we speaking? Is it intentional or not? Is it aligned with our purpose or not? Are we just rolling through life saying things that come to our mind? Our words have power, and we need to make sure that pillar of our structure is well maintained. The third pillar of our life is our associations. I love what Jim Rohn said here. He said, you will become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you spend the most time with 5 people that their marriage is great, your marriage is probably gonna be great. If you spend the most time with 5 people that their finances are fantastic and they're millionaires, you're probably going to be a millionaire sooner than later. But if you spend the most time with 5 people that are negative, that are complaining, that are just scraping by, you're probably going to be the average of those 5 people. Associations matter, and we got to be intentional with the associations based on the area that we're trying to rebuild. And the fourth pillar of our structure is our habits, right? A famous quote once said that people don't determine their future, people determine their habits, and their habits determine their future. And I love that. And so the habits are the fourth pillar of our structure. And so when we're tearing down our structure, those 4 pillars are going to be really important. We're going to have to tear down and inspect what our thoughts are. We're going to have to inspect and tear down what our words look like. We're going to have to inspect and tear down our associations and our habits. So before we can rebuild, we got to let go of some stuff, especially in the terms of those 4 pillars. We got to let go of some old structures that no longer serve us. This may mean letting go of some limiting beliefs or old habits, or I don't know, even relationships that are holding us back. For me, when I left my corporate environment, I had been settling in that environment for quite some time. And that corporate environment was aiding in my habit of drinking every day. And therefore, that habit had been leading to not parenting properly and not being a proper spouse and not being aligned with the purpose that God had for my life, because I felt guilty all the time. All I cared about was getting away with this habit. I got to tell you, when you do the work of rebuilding, when you start to tear these things down, it becomes blatantly and painfully obvious that while it wasn't intended to be this bad, it becomes obvious why it became that bad, because the 4 pillars we're about to dig into have aligned very directly with this part of my life going down a really bad path. So let's inspect those 4 pillars as they are today. And let's figure out how that teardown needs to look. So the first pillar, if we remember, is thoughts. So here's what we got to ask ourselves about our thoughts. Are our thoughts intentional? Are we thinking about what we think about? Are we determining before things happen how I'm going to think about a situation? Or are they just easily influenced by how I feel that day or the weather or how people act around me? Are they aligned with my purpose? Am I thinking about what I'm thinking about and making sure that my thoughts are aligned with my destiny and my assignment on this earth? This is an easy one, but a painful one. At least it was for me. Are my thoughts positive or negative? Pretty straightforward, but I don't think we think about that often. The next one is, hey, are our thoughts taking us forward or backward? And the last inspection question or series is very aligned with that. Are our thoughts future focused or past focused? Are we thinking about just what's going on today? Or are we intentionally taking time to think about, how do I want my marriage to look next year? How do I want my parenting to look in the next 12 months? How do I want my finances to look? If I'm thinking about just right now, I will make decisions for right now. But if I'm thinking about what I want my future to look like in this area, then my decisions will be based on the thought focus in that area. Your thoughts have power. Let's think about what we're thinking about. The second pillar is around words, if we remember. So very similarly, are our words intentional or are they driven by our feelings? Are we taking time to speak life into our world? Are we taking time to speak into our future? Are our words disciplined or are they emotional? Ooh, there's a couple ones that are coming up here that are really powerful. Are my words grateful or greedy? Am I just speaking about what I want, or am I speaking life into other people? And here's the last one in words. Are my words short term or long term? Am I speaking? This is a good example. I'll use finances as an example, and then I'll go into one more. If I'm in a financial situation and I need to rebuild my finances, I'm not going to be able to afford some things right now. But am I saying we can't afford that, or am I saying we can't afford that yet? See, there's the difference between short term and long term. I can't afford that, but I can't afford that yet. Give me 12 months, we're going to be able to afford that. We're going to be able to afford to go on that vacation. And I'm speaking life into me and to those around me. What happens if I'm struggling with an addiction? My short-term words may sound like, yeah, I'm fighting this addiction, man. I'm just fighting it, taking it day by day. The long-term words I may be fighting it today, but I can't wait until the day that battle's won and I walk in freedom. You have to intentionally align your words with what your future wants to look like. The third area is associations. We need to evaluate who's in our circle. We need to evaluate who those 5 people that we spend the most time with are, according to Jim Roh's quote. Who is in your circle? You have to inspect. Are those people impacting people, or are they just existing? I got to tell you, for me, when I looked at my associations, a lot of people were just existing. A lot of people were just going day by day. A lot of people, if you ask the people around me, how's your week going? How you doing today? Man, it's another day. Nobody was really impacting people. They weren't dreaming. And that comes to the next question. Are you around dreamers or not? Are you around people that are chasing their purpose or not? Are they chasing purpose or are they chasing comfort? All they look forward to is the weekend. All they look forward to is Thursday night football. All they look forward to is getting to another weekend, getting to another happy hour, getting to another end of a day. Are they growing or are they just stagnant? Are they impacting people or existing? And are they creating or consuming? Are they creating the future they want? Or are they just consuming whatever life throws at them? See, my associations are huge. And if I inspect who's in my circle, especially around the areas I'm rebuilding, I think I'll find those people are probably struggling the same way I am. So those relationships may need to be audited. And the fourth pillar and the questions we can ask is around habits. So we got to inspect our day-to-day routine. Habits are things we do every day, almost subconsciously. So what's our day-to-day routine look like? Is it constructive or destructive? Is it focused on sowing or is it focused on reaping? Is it focused on what can the day give me? What can I get out of today? Or is it focused on who can I impact today? What can I sow today? Can I sow good words? Can I sow good deeds? Can I sow positivity? Can I sow energy? Or is it just what can the day give me? Hey, are my habits intentional or random? The next two are going to blow your mind because it blew mine. Are my habits more like 5 years from now? Or are they more like 5 years ago? Are they more like 12 months from now? What I want 12 months from now to look like? Or are they more aligned with 12 months ago? That question is really about, are my habits aligned with my future or my present? My future or my past? And to change those habits from past aligned to future aligned is going to take intentionality. And it's going to take some rebuilding. And often it's going to take digging underneath the structure to figure out what in my foundation has created these things in my structure. Because here's what I got to tell you, as we start to come to a close with our time together, is that a lot of my structure wasn't built by me. My foundation wasn't built by me. It was built in a set of circumstances that it was out of my control. It was built by a set of circumstances with where I was born, who my parents were, what my association was as I was growing up, the schools I went to, the movies I was exposed to, the environment that I was exposed. All of those things created in me the need to build the structure as it currently exists. And then it just compounded on itself. It wasn't intentional. It was necessary. But now as we look at our life at this phase, we may be looking at areas where we say, this structure is no longer serving the purpose that I'm aligned to. And that's what rebuilding is. It is for the first time in your life, intentionally looking at who you are as the temple of God and figuring out, am I the person with which I can live out my assignment on this earth? Or is my structure and my foundation built on circumstance, something that is not able to support what I believe I'm put on this earth to do? And if that's you, that's okay. Because I gotta be honest, it's most of us. Mainly because even if you had great parents, and I had great ones, if you had great parents and you grew up in a decent neighborhood and your childhood was great, but you were built by people, circumstances, environments that were trying to survive themselves. They weren't intentionally trying to build me. And they weren't intentionally trying to build me for the purpose I was built for, because they may not have known the purpose I was built for. And so as I share my own story, maybe you saw a glimpse of yourself in the reflection that we just went through for the last 25 minutes, where outward success just doesn't feel like inward fulfillment. And the journey of rebuilding can be really powerful. And we only scratched the surface today. There are two more vital steps to this process in phase 2 and phase 3. Man, phase 3 is really fun, where you start to get the multiplication of the blessings of the rebuild. And trust me, the real shift happens in phase 3. And that's where you stop striving and start living, being as the person you were meant to be. You know, the Bible says, be fruitful and multiply. So the first thing we were called to do as people is to be the person that I was meant to be. And so I leave you with this. Do the initial work. Take a close, honest look at the areas we talked about today and ask yourself the tough questions. Are we thriving? Are we fulfilling our purpose? The process isn't quick or easy, but the reward on the other side is everything you've been yearning for. And I don't know if this message resonated with you, there's more to explore. And I hope you'll continue the journey, not just for the sake of changing things up, but for the sake of realigning with the purpose that's been calling you all along. And I think your purpose is waiting. The question is, are you ready to start the rebuild? And if you want to go on this journey with me, let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe to the channel. I would love to be able to go on the journey with you. I'm going to be releasing a book in the spring that talks about exactly what this is, along with some study guides and putting together some small groups across the country. But if this resonated with you, I'd love to take the journey with you. Let's do it together.